Oh, I think you're going to like today's story. If you're anything like me and you have even an ounce of appreciation for a good petty revenge story, and honestly, I know that you do because I see how many of you have already watched that story about Napoleon being chased by the bunnies that he was there to hunt. Yeah, I know that you like a good plot twist. You'll like this story. This is a story of spite and sabotage and sweet, sweet petty revenge that all ends up eventually landing in your pocket, weirdly enough. That smartphone that you keep in your pocket, the one you're probably holding on to right now as you listen to this story, that little marvel of modern technology is actually a direct descendant of one man's refusal to let a competitor's wife steal his business. This is the story of Almond Brown Stoger, undertaker, inventor, and the patron saint of all things petty. Now, Almond Stoger wasn't born petty and seeking revenge. So far as I know, he didn't come out of the womb vengeful. He was just a kid born in New York in the 1840s in Penfield, near Rochester. And he was a clever kid. He and his brothers used to get chores from their mother and try to come up with machines that would do the work for them. You know, work smarter, not harder. Now, the seeds of this problem solving, this entrepreneurial spirit, this creative mindset would serve him well in life. That was probably the first indication of it. But before he became the inventor that he was to be, he went through a few other jobs first. After the Civil War, he was with the 8th New York Cavalry, and then he spent a few years traveling the country, heading west as a school teacher. Then, somehow, he ended up in Kansas City, Missouri, as an undertaker. I don't know quite how you make the leap from cavalry to school teacher to undertaker, but I'm betting that after a few years as a school teacher, he decided that quiet people were going to be a good job, working with quiet people. Anyway, I digress. He is now in Kansas City, Missouri, in the 1880s. He's working as a funeral director, and life is good, life is steady, right? Life is reliable, so is death. Funeral business is stable, and it is profitable, and you get a steady flow of new customers. People haven't stopped dying yet. He was able to build a respectable establishment, made a good life for himself. But then after a while, something a little weird started to happen. He saw a fall off in business. It's not like fewer people were dying, but he was getting fewer customers. At the same time, his competitor was doing really well. Business was booming. As a matter of fact, he knew full well where his customers or potential customers had gone to. And here's where the telephone comes in. Now, I should preface this by explaining that in the 1880s, right, things obviously worked differently. When Alexander Graham Bell's telephones went spreading across American cities, the infrastructure was completely manual. There were no direct lines between telephones. Instead, when you picked up your telephone, you would be connected to a central switchboard that would be operated by a human being, almost always a woman. And you would tell the operator the number you wanted to reach, or possibly the person that you wanted to reach, and she would physically connect your line, the cable that you were calling in on, and plug it into a jack for the person you were calling. It was on a big old massive switchboard. Every call that was made required human intervention. That's why when you see those really antique telephones, they don't have push buttons. They don't even have dials on them. Just two bells, a crank that you would use to let the operator know that you were trying to call somebody. So all of this is done very manually. This is done with human intervention. Every operator knows everybody's business. The fatal flaw with this system, though, is that the operator does have complete control over who gets connected to whom. You see where I'm going with this, I think. Astrologer began to suspect this arrangement created an opportunity for corporate sabotage. Whenever someone called asking for an undertaker, or perhaps even when they specifically requested Stroger's services, his competitor's wife, who worked the switchboard in town, would connect them to her husband's funeral parlor instead, stealing the business. For a long time, Stroger was none the wiser, but then he had it confirmed. He began to grow suspicious, and he had it confirmed in 1888 when he was reading the local newspaper and he spotted an obituary for a friend of his. Someone that by rights should have been his customer. And yet he was reading about this, learning about his friend's death, in an obituary that talked about how the funeral was going to be held at his competitor's funeral parlor. Suspicious. So, he decided he had to do something. He had to come up with a way to fix this. He had to make an invention. I mean, okay, so there were probably other ways to deal with unfair business practices. You could file a complaint. But, I mean, come on. What are the odds that she would patch him through to her boss? Not likely. He could spread rumors, tell people what she's doing, but that might look unprofessional. It might look like he was bitter, and it might look like he just was lying. So, again, he came back to an invention. He decided that he was going to invent an entirely new telecommunications system. One that would make telephone operators as a whole obsolete. Not just the one, I mean like every last one. That's how pissed off he was. So, it starts off as a crude idea, but he very quickly hits a snag. See, he didn't really have the technical expertise he needed. That's where he enlisted the help of his nephew, who did have electrical expertise. And along with his nephew, Walter, he also got a guy named Joseph Harris. The three of them together took this crude idea and turned it into an actual prototype, into an actual viable invention. In 1889, he formed the Stroger Automatic Telephone Exchange Company. Their mission was to put telephone operators out of business forever. On March 12th, 1889, he filed a patent for the application of his automatic telephone exchange. And right there on the patent description, it says, the subscriber may connect his own line with the line of another subscriber without the intervention of an operator at a central station. I mean, he said the quiet part out loud right there on the patent. He was coming for her job. But, not just her job. Like I said, this was a war on switchboard operators everywhere. Now, I need to understand the magnitude here. So it's not just a couple of people. The manual telephone system of the 1880s wasn't just a technological standard. It was an entire industry. There were thousands of operators in exchanges across the country. The first switchboard operators actually were, in 1878, initially operated by teenage boys. But, they were teenage boys. They were unreliable and sometimes rude. And they also started doing the very first prank calls. Just generally being obnoxious. So, telephone companies started hiring women instead. A woman named Emma Nutt. Emma Nutt, that was her name. First female telephone operator in 1878. In September, it didn't last long with the teenage boys at all. And then it began this whole tradition of female-dominated switchboard operators that lasted for the better part of the next century. By Stroger's time, the telephone exchanges were these massive operations. In busy cities, dozens of operators worked all the time at enormous switchboards handling hundreds of calls per hour. The telephone companies had invested fortunes in this infrastructure and trained an entire workforce around it. And then here was old Stroger, an undertaker with a grudge, proposing to make the entire system obsolete. A little contraption built from a collar box and some pins. It's kind of a David and Goliath story, and David had a Goliath-sized score to settle, so maybe that made it even. In November 1892, the world's first automatic telephone exchange went into operation in LaPorte, Indiana. Served about 75 subscribers. And initially, the system used buttons rather than a dial. Callers would press buttons corresponding to the digits they wanted to reach. It wasn't elegant, but it worked. Now, it was a little bit more confusing for people, this new telephone. New technology always is. And it took slightly more effort from the caller, but the advantages of privacy and an immediate connection dial a few numbers. Within just a few years, Stroger's company had refined the interface. In 1896, some engineers named A.E. Keith and the Erickson brothers patented the rotary dial to replace the push-button system. This was the dial that you picture with the circular thing, the holes for the fingers that you would turn until it hit a little notch where you would stop and make that little whir sound. That's some good ASMR right there. I need to do that someday. It's a great sound. I, unsurprisingly, have a few antique telephones from different eras. Now, every one of those clicks on that rotary dial was a little message to the phone, chirping out the number that it was supposed to connect to. And it was also the sound of petty, petty revenge. Now, here's where his story takes another little bit of an unexpected turn. He has now created this revolutionary technology, right? Something that would transform global communications. And Stroger, the inventor, the man who has now made a good amount of money on this, he walked away from it. In 1896, it was just a few years, just as his invention was starting to gain traction, he started to sell patent rights to his friends for $1,800 a pop. And then he sold his interest in the Stroger Automatic Telephone Exchange Company for about $10,000. Like maybe $350,000 today. Can you even imagine? I mean, but he was in it for the revenge. He wants to get rid of operators, and that's what he'd done. He got rid of the switchboard operators. He was taking down that industry. And he took his little profit. He moved down to St. Petersburg, Florida, because when you're from New York, like, you've got to retire in Florida. It's basically the law. And he went back to being an undertaker. I mean, he had enough money to live. He was doing okay. And he could have stayed with that company and just lived off of the profits from that. But no, he went back to being an undertaker. He had just taken a little detour in his actual business in order to disrupt an entire industry and, slowly but surely put thousands of operators out of work. Yeah, fundamentally change how people communicate, all because someone had redirected his business calls. And then he went back to work as an undertaker for someone else this time. He wasn't working for his own business. He spent his retirement in Florida. And eventually he passed there, and he was buried by the funeral home that he had worked for after he left the telephone business. So, Stroger's petty little revenge did spread like wildfire over the next few decades. By 1900, the automatic exchanges were operating in many American cities. In 1901, the first Stroger exchange outside the United States was installed in Berlin. By 1920, there were over 4 million automatic telephones in the service worldwide. The irony is kind of funny. This system designed to thwart one operator in Kansas City just took down the entire profession. I mean, of course, the transition wasn't immediate. Manual exchanges continued to operate alongside the automatic ones for a good few decades. And the last manual switchboard in the United States didn't actually close until 1983. But the writing was on the wall from the moment Stroger's invention proved viable. The advantages of automatically switching were undeniable. Faster connections, complete privacy, lower operating costs, and 24-hour service. No longer had to worry about operators listening in on their conversations or playing favorites among businesses or working limited hours. The Stroger switch system dominated telephone technology for most of the 20th century. The mechanical step-by-step system was gradually refined, but it remained fundamentally unchanged from its basic operation. When you dialed a number on a rotary phone, you connected to a Stroger exchange. In the 1960s, electronic switching systems started to replace Stroger's mechanical technology, and these computer-controlled systems were more compact and they could handle a more call volume. The transition sped up over the 70s and 80s as digital technology transformed telecommunications. Today's smartphones, those sleek, digital, internet-connected, delicious devices, bears little resemblance to Stroger's mechanical switches, but conceptually, they are, as I said, direct descendants of his little revenge device. Every time you tap to place a call, you're following the exact same principle Stroger established: direct user control over whomever you connect with. No human intermediary required. So congratulations on helping an old man, long dead, continue his revenge against a sneaky little undertaker's wife. Thank you very much for joining me yet again. It's always fun to chat with you. You have a great day, and I will talk to you again soon.